Imagine standing on the rocky shore of a peninsula in 1620, where waves crash against stones that have never heard English voices. The Shawmut Peninsula stretches before you, three small hills covered in dense virgin forest, untouched by European axes or ambition. Ancient oak trees tower overhead, their branches intertwined for centuries. The air smells of salt water, pine needles, and possibility. Native Massachusetts people have lived here for thousands of years, calling this place home, fishing these waters, walking these paths. But recent devastating epidemics have swept through, leaving the peninsula largely empty of its original inhabitants, a haunting silence. A natural freshwater spring bubbles up on the western slope, crystal clear water that will determine everything that follows. The harbour provides perfect protection from Atlantic storms, its islands forming a natural barrier that seafarers immediately recognize. This is the blank canvas upon which one of America's greatest cities will be painted, though nobody yet knows it. The wilderness holds no promise yet, no streets, no names, no future, only potential waiting for someone brave or foolish enough. What transforms empty land into civilization? What turns forest into foundation? The answer begins with a single solitary man. In 1623, a peculiar Englishman named William Blaxton rowed ashore carrying nothing but books, tools, and an extraordinary desire for solitude. Blaxton was an Anglican minister who'd grown weary of both religious disputes and crowded settlements in the Plymouth and Wessagusset colonies. He chose Shawmut Peninsula precisely because it was empty, building his cottage on the western slope near that precious spring. With his own hands, he felled trees, shaped logs, and constructed a simple one-room dwelling with stone fireplace and thatched roof. Blaxton planted an orchard of apple trees, the first cultivated fruit in what would become Boston, tending them like children. His library of nearly 200 books was extraordinary for the frontier: theology, philosophy, classical literature stacked carefully on shelves. For 7 years he lived utterly alone on the peninsula, the sole European among forests, wildlife, and occasional Native American visitors. He read by candlelight, walked his land daily, and enjoyed what he called liberation from the religious bickering of other colonies. But Blaxton's solitary paradise would soon end, when across the harbour, hundreds of desperate English settlers faced a crisis. Sometimes the foundation of great things begins with one person choosing an unconventional path, planting seeds nobody else imagines. June 1630 brought 11 ships across the Atlantic horizon, their white sails visible for miles, carrying 700 souls seeking religious freedom. The Winthrop Fleet represented the largest migration yet to New England. Families, children, livestock, tools, hopes compressed into wooden vessels. Governor John Winthrop had delivered his famous sermon aboard the Arbella about building a city upon a hill, a beacon to the world. But ideals meet reality harshly. They settled in Charlestown, only to discover the water supply was brackish, contaminated, undrinkable. Within weeks, settlers began dying from dysentery and fever. Their grand vision was drowning in bad water and worse planning. Men who'd invested everything in this venture watched children sicken. Women who'd left England forever questioned every decision they'd made. Governor Winthrop faced collapse of the entire settlement. Without fresh water, they couldn't survive summer, let alone build their shining city. Then word reached them of a hermit living alone across the harbour, on a peninsula with an excellent spring of pure water. Winthrop sent messengers to William Blaxton, begging him to share his land, offering compensation, appealing to Christian charity and English solidarity. Blaxton faced a choice: maintain his solitude and watch people die, or sacrifice his paradise to save lives. What would you choose? Blaxton stood at his cottage door for a long time, weighing 7 years of solitude against hundreds of desperate lives across the water. Whatever personal reservations he held about Puritans, he was fundamentally a man of conscience who couldn't ignore suffering when he could help. He sent word back: "Come, the spring flows freely for all who need it. I will sell portions of my land at fair price." September 1630 marked the beginning of Boston proper, as boats filled with settlers rowed from Charlestown to the Shawmut Peninsula shore. Men, women, and children stepped onto the rocky coastline, their faces showing relief mixed with exhaustion, hope tempered by recent losses. Blaxton led Governor Winthrop and the town's leaders to his spring, where clear water bubbled from the hillside in endless supply. They drank deeply, tears streaming down some faces, recognizing this water as their salvation, the literal foundation of everything to come. Winthrop named the settlement Boston, after the Lincolnshire town many settlers had departed from, honoring their English roots while claiming new ground. Blaxton sold most of his land for £30, keeping just 6 acres near his cottage and orchard, his paradise shrinking with each new neighbour. Sometimes your greatest contribution requires giving up what you treasure most, transforming personal space into shared foundation for others' dreams. The romantic vision of building a new society vanished the moment axes struck the first tree, replaced by brutal physical reality. Teams of men spent 12-hour days felling massive oaks and pines, their muscles screaming, their hands developing blisters that burst and bled. They dragged logs to crude sawpits where 2-man teams worked saws in rhythm, one above and one below, creating rough planks and beams. Carpenters framed houses in the English style, post and beam construction with wattle and daub walls, steep thatched roofs to shed rain and snow. Women established households in structures barely better than sheds, setting up cooking hearths, organizing precious supplies brought from England. Children worked alongside adults, carrying water from Blaxton's spring, gathering stones for foundations, learning that survival demanded everyone's contribution. The smell of fresh-cut wood and wood smoke filled the air constantly. The sounds of hammering, sawing, and shouted instructions echoed across hillsides. But winter was coming, and their race against cold weather drove them harder. Houses had to have roofs and fireplaces before snow arrived. Some settlers couldn't handle the brutal labour and returned to England on the next ships, admitting defeat, choosing comfort over vision. Those who stayed developed something invaluable: the understanding that great achievements require sacrifice, pain, and persistence through overwhelming difficulty. By 1632, Boston had something more valuable than individual houses: a shared space where the community could gather as one body. The first meeting house stood on what's now the corner of State and Devonshire streets, plain, unadorned, deliberately simple in Puritan fashion. Its bare wooden walls reflected their theology: reject Catholic ornamentation, focus on scripture and preaching, value substance over decoration. Every Sunday, families walked through muddy streets to worship together, men sitting separately from women, all dressed in their finest dark clothes. Services lasted 3 hours or more, with lengthy sermons analyzing biblical texts, communal prayers, psalm singing that echoed through wooden walls. But the meeting house served secular purposes too. Town meetings happened here, where free male property owners debated and voted on community matters. They discussed land distribution, taxation, defense against threats, and the countless practical decisions required to build functioning government from scratch. Disputes between neighbors were settled here too, with elders mediating conflicts, seeking reconciliation, maintaining social order through moral authority. The meeting house represented their covenant, the binding agreement that held them together as more than just individuals sharing geography. Successful communities require shared spaces and shared purposes, places where individuals become we, where private concerns meet public good. April 1635 marked something extraordinary. Settlers barely surviving in the wilderness voted to establish a public school at community expense. Think about that decision. They were still building basic infrastructure, yet they prioritized education, believing literate citizens essential for society's future. Boston Latin School became America's first public school, opening in a simple wooden building with Philemon Pourmont as the first schoolmaster. Boys from age 7 onward studied Latin grammar, Greek, classical literature, rhetoric, logic, curriculum designed to produce educated, thoughtful leaders. The Puritans valued literacy passionately, believing everyone should read the Bible directly rather than depending on priests to interpret scripture. Students memorized vast amounts of text, debated in Latin, studied ancient history, preparing for Harvard College, which would open just a year later. Discipline was strict, corporal punishment common, expectations high, the belief firm that education required hard work, not entertainment. Boston Latin School would eventually produce 5 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Countless ministers, judges, writers, leaders, shaping American thought. The school still operates today, America's oldest public school, nearly 400 years of continuous education in the same tradition. Societies that invest in education during hardship create their own future leaders, turning present sacrifice into generational advantage and cultural legacy. Boston's greatest natural advantage was always its harbour, deep, protected, with multiple channels, perfect for the maritime commerce that would define it. By the late 1630s, the waterfront buzzed with constant activity. Ships arriving from England, vessels departing for Caribbean and Mediterranean ports. Merchants built warehouses along the shore, storing timber cut from endless forests, dried codfish from Grand Banks, beaver pelts from frontier traders. Ships arrived with manufactured goods from England, cloth, tools, hardware, luxury items colonists couldn't produce themselves but desperately wanted. The triangular trade emerged. New England ships carried fish and timber to the Caribbean, molasses to New England for rum, rum to Africa for slaves. This cruel commerce enriched Boston merchants but stained the city's moral foundation, a dark legacy that would haunt America for centuries. Shipbuilding became Boston's signature industry. The harbor filled with new vessels under construction, their wooden ribs rising like cathedral architecture. Boston-built ships gained reputation for quality and speed, sold throughout Atlantic world, making the town wealthy beyond agricultural colonies' imaginations. Successful merchants built grand houses on the hillsides, their prosperity visible proof that strategic location plus hard work creates economic opportunity. Geography provides opportunity, but success requires recognizing advantages and building systems to exploit them. Boston's harbor meant nothing until merchants arrived. By mid-century, Boston bore little resemblance to the wilderness Blaxton had known. The transformation from forest to functioning town was nearly complete. Streets followed logical patterns now, no longer random paths but planned thoroughfares connecting wharves to residential neighborhoods and commercial districts. The population had grown to several thousand souls, families, merchants, craftsmen, laborers, servants, creating density and diversity unimaginable in 1630. Specialized craftsmen established shops, blacksmiths, coopers, shoemakers, tailors, printers, each serving specific needs in increasingly complex economy. Taverns offered food, drink, lodging, and news. Social centers where merchants made deals, travelers shared stories, and political discussions grew heated. Church towers rose above the roofline now, multiple congregations reflecting theological disputes that fractured Puritan unity into competing factions. The old state house was constructed in 1658, providing permanent government headquarters, courts, merchant exchange, symbols of established civic authority. Street names emerged: King Street, Cornhill, Marlborough Street, each designation marking Boston's evolution from temporary camp to permanent settlement. Wealthy merchants built increasingly elaborate homes with glass windows, plastered walls, fine furniture imported from England, displaying their success. Cities aren't born, they're built. One street, one building, one decision at a time, until accumulated choices create distinctive character. In 1634, Boston set aside 50 acres as Boston Common, America's oldest public park, land deliberately preserved for shared community use. This wasn't recreational space as we'd recognize it, but practical shared land where townspeople could graze livestock, maintaining agricultural livelihoods. Cows, sheep, horses grazed freely on the common pasture, overseen by town herdsmen who drove animals to and from homes daily. The militia trained here too, men drilling with muskets, learning military formations, preparing for potential Native American conflicts or French invasion threats. Public punishments occurred on the common as well. Stocks, whipping posts, gallows stood here, making justice visible, deterring crime through public shame. Despite harsh aspects, the common served vital social function, space where all classes mixed, where servants walked alongside merchants, equalizing force. Children played here, couples courted, neighbors encountered each other naturally, the common physically embodying the idea of shared community resources. The decision to preserve this land rather than selling it for private development showed remarkable foresight, prioritizing long-term community benefit. 4 centuries later, Boston Common still serves the public, now for recreation and gatherings, an unbroken chain of shared space. Strong communities balance private property with shared resources, recognizing that some things gain value when held in common, not divided. By the 1690s, Boston had achieved something remarkable, becoming British North America's largest, most prosperous, most culturally sophisticated urban center. The population exceeded 6,000 residents, dwarfing Philadelphia, New York, and Charleston, establishing Boston's dominance in colonial commerce and culture. Brick buildings began replacing wooden structures downtown, 3 and 4 stories tall, with tile roofs reflecting both prosperity and reducing fire risk. Bookshops flourished, selling imported volumes and locally printed works, serving the most literate population in the colonies with insatiable reading appetite. Coffee houses emerged as centers of debate and commerce, where merchants negotiated deals while discussing European news brought by latest ships. Boston's printing presses produced newspapers, religious tracts, scientific works, political pamphlets, the town becoming colonial America's intellectual publishing center. The merchant class displayed wealth through elaborate clothing, imported furniture, silverware, demonstrating that frontier hardship had yielded to established prosperity. Yet prosperity created inequality too. Wealthy merchants lived vastly different lives than laborers, servants, sailors crowded into waterfront tenements. Still, Boston's transformation was undeniable. From Blaxton's lonely cottage in 1623 to a thriving city rivaling English provincial towns in just 7 decades. Success compounds over generations when foundations are well laid, when education is prioritized, when commerce meets culture, when vision persists through hardship. Stand mentally on that same rocky shore where Puritan settlers first landed in 1630, desperate, sick, facing overwhelming uncertainty about survival. Now fast forward just 60 years to 1690. That same spot surrounded by brick buildings, busy streets, thriving commerce, intellectual life rivaling European cities. What created this transformation? Not luck, not accident, but deliberate choices about what to prioritize when resources were desperately scarce. They prioritized education when they could barely feed themselves, establishing schools before streets were paved, believing knowledge was foundational. They created shared spaces like Boston Common, recognizing that community requires places where individuals become we, where private meets public. They endured backbreaking labor without guarantee of success, persisting through winters that killed friends, through disease, through doubt. They built institutions, churches, schools, government, before they were comfortable, understanding that structure creates possibility for future generations. Your life parallels this story. You're building something from raw materials every day, whether you recognize it consciously or not. What foundations are you laying today? Are you investing in education, skills, relationships that will compound over decades like Boston's early choices? Leave a comment telling us what you're building in your life, what foundations you're laying today that will determine your future decades from now.